Good morning. I'd like to call to order the open meeting for Thursday, October 10th, 2024. I will now ask the Commission Secretary for information on today's agenda.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, September 26, 2024, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the minutes.
I move we approve the minutes of the open meeting of Thursday, September 26, 2024.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Each commissioner has independently reviewed the agenda, and each has informed me there is no need to discuss the notices associated with agenda items 2 through 7, the draft order closing docket 2752 WI 100 associated with agenda item 8, the suggested minute associated with agenda item 9, denying the request of Mr. Joseph Duncan for formal review of the complaint filed by Joseph Duncan and joined by Raymond Duncan against Wisconsin Electric Power Company, the suggested minute associated with agenda item 10, agreeing to dismiss the complaint by joint execution of a consent agreement between the Commission and Rock Road Companies Incorporated, accepting the consent agreement as drafted, which assesses a forfeiture against Rock Road Companies Incorporated of $5,000 and a $500 surcharge to Diggers Hotline, Inc. Or the suggested minute associated with agenda item 11, determining that Focus shall receive full attribution of gross savings for projects and measures receiving co-funding from Focus and IRA HER programs.
All right, I move we approve the notices of investigation associated with agenda items 2 and 3.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I move we approve the notices of proceeding associated with agenda items 4 through 7.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. In docket 2752 WI 100, I move we approve the draft order closing the investigation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
In docket 6630 CC 244210, I move we deny the request for formal review of the complaint.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. In docket 9300 PLI 133, I move we agree to dismiss the complaint by joint execution of a consent agreement between the Commission and the respondent.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. And for agenda item 11 in docket 5FE 104, I move that we apply a full gross savings attribution framework for co-funded projects and measures.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that brings us to agenda item 12, docket 5FE 104, the beneficial electrification and fuel neutral savings goal elements of the quadrennial planning process for Focus on Energy. Commissioner Nieto is the delegated commissioner to Focus on Energy, so I will turn it over to her to lead our discussion.
Thank you, Chair Strand. So we have a few decisions to make today regarding the Focus on Energy program. The first 3 decision points are really just a request from staff and the program administrator, Aptum, for interim guidance as they set the stage for the next quadrennium. So in 2022, the Commission established the Quad 4 plan, and Quad 4 goes from 2023 to 2026. And that's the quadrennium we're currently in, and we're halfway through it. As part of the plan, the Commission directed Focus to use Quad 4 as a transitional period to position the program to take on a larger role in promoting beneficial electrification statewide. So we're about exactly halfway through Quad 4 with 2 years left. It's a good check-in point. Staff and Aptum are checking in and looking for feedback on how to continue positioning the program as directed. So today we can put a few more definitions and details in place to help the teams who are continuing to work on this. And so it's basically so they can develop solid options to suggest and to present to us for Quad 5. That said, we don't need to solve all things beneficial electrification today. We're about halfway through some transitional and planning work here. And then we have a fourth decision point that's on fuel neutral savings goals, and that is interconnected with these discussions around beneficial electrification. I will say thank you to staff and to Aptum for the research you've done thus far and for delivering these comprehensive discussions and options to us. This has been very helpful at this midpoint. And we also got really useful comments from Clean Wisconsin, WLGCC, and MIA. So thanks to commenters for bringing your areas of expertise to bear in this discussion. In terms of the decision items themselves, we have a few decisions to make around defining beneficial electrification, how it's going to be used in the focus program. And I will say, as an initial matter, to help clear up something I saw that was maybe a little inconsistent in some of the comments, is just framing this discussion around fuel switching versus beneficial electrification and what we're deciding today and what we're not. I think, so first of all, we have a fuel switching policy in the focus manual. We're not voting today to change the fuel switching policy or the focus program manual in any way today. Our fuel switching policy, it guides eligibility for an incentive to be paid out. So for example, you can't switch into an unregulated fuel. That's the fuel switching policy. What we are voting on today is a broad definition of beneficial electrification. This isn't a definition that we're adding to the policy manual as a result of this discussion. This is giving staff and APTM the parameters that they need to continue to research and to know what the commission's priorities are so they can tee up good options for us in the next quad. And then maybe in the quad 5 discussion, with those options teed up for us, the definition of beneficial electrification will be added to the policy manual. And then that's what's used to check projects and measures to see if they're eligible for incentives. We're not there yet. Hopefully that helps for folks. So getting into the definition of beneficial electrification, the first decision we have to make is on lower consumer costs. For this one, I was at Alt 1, that lower consumer costs should be broadly interpreted and can consider both energy and non-energy costs over a project's lifetime. I do think we should maintain a definition that allows the program to do what it does best, design and bring to the commission proposals for programs that customers will be interested in at the time they're interested in them and will achieve goals in a cost-effective way. And I think as we all know with any energy efficiency program, there are multiple layers of benefits to customers. So there are benefits to the recipient customer who's receiving the measure in their home. And then there are benefits to all the customers of the utilities as a whole, of the utility achieving savings. And so that's a little bit what we're grappling with in this lower cost definition. With that, I was at Alt 1 for this one. Chair Strand?
I was at alternative 2 initially, but I can definitely join you at alternative 1. And you did a great job of explaining your position on this and just in general kind of setting the framework for where we are within the plan. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Hawkins?
I was actually behind door number 3 for this one originally, and I think I can join you at Alt 1 as well, but the process was helpful for my understanding. I noted that there was a lot of discussion of other beneficial electrification definitions that exist, and that some of them speak to cost effectiveness more broadly and allow for flexibility that way. And I just thought that that might be an easier way to go about getting some of this flexibility instead of adding the other, like on the cost side, talking about what's in, what's out for costs. And so that's just my 2 cents. I think you can get to the same place either way, but when potentially we're getting suggested changes to that definition back to us for the Quad 5 planning, I think that it's just another route that should be considered, the cost effectiveness, and then using some of those other definitions that are all over the industry to go about it that way. So I'm fine joining at Alt 1, but would like to see some potential definitions with that approach. So
Thank you, and that makes sense. That was in my initial read-through of this. I was in the exact same spot, kind of, why don't we just make a holistic definition change as opposed to tinkering with like the lower cost aspect of it. And ultimately, I think going through it, I landed on this Alt 1 in combination with what I'll vote for the next alternative. But I think that's a good flag for staff and for the program administrator. Let's continue to look at this when we get into these implementation discussions in Quad 5. And is there a way to tee this up that makes a little bit, even more sense and is more holistic?
Okay.
We had some good national examples, I agree.
Yeah, yep.
Thanks to you both. The next set of alternatives are on the overall definition of beneficial electrification. Here I went between Alt 1 and Alt 2 here. I'm ultimately going to vote for alternative 1. The difference between 1 and 2 is number 1, it's the status quo definition staff have been working on right now, and it takes into consideration the source of energy when calculating energy savings. Alt 2 looks at a site-based measurement for energy savings, and there are pros and cons to both of these, and ultimately what I landed on is, number 1, I agree with Aptum that source energy appears to be a more holistic consideration. It's likely better aligned with the goal and aligns the actual measurements to the goal a little bit better. There are a lot of challenges around it. Commenters commented that source might not be a very reliable metric at this time. That said, we're only 2 years into just the planning for implementation, so we do have time. So with that, I thought it would be best to stay with Alt 1, stay with source, give Aptum and staff a little bit more time to explore source and that incentive to continue to do it at a minimum before we come back and say, do site. So with that, I'm at Alt 1. And Chair Strand, how about you?
Initially, I was at alternative 2 because though alternative 1 is a status quo within the quad plan 4, I think site is a little more consistent with like kind of focus as a whole. But I think it makes sense to kind of finish out the quad and see where we end up on the source side. So I can join you at 1 for now. Thank
Sounds
you.
great. Thank you. And Commissioner Hawkins?
Yeah, my main concern with these alternatives was that I think source is the most important. I think that we shouldn't be incentivizing things that end up leading to greater consumed energy or fuels anywhere in the system. And so that should be sort of our end goal. And so I was looking at alternative 4 or alternative 1, and alternative 4 was my preference. I know that there was discussion about the potential to encourage combined heat and power applications when it was more broadly interpreted to be beneficial fuel switching instead of just beneficial electrification. So there was additional flexibility under the alternative 4 approach. So I thought that was worthy of consideration. So I can certainly join you at Alt 1, but I didn't know if there was anything else as far as beneficial fuel switching and trying to broaden out the definition that would be worthy of us pursuing.
I appreciate what you're saying, and I thought about the same things, and I was initially leaning towards an Alt 4 in combination with that lower cost discussion too. I think I took some of Clean's comments to heart on some of the disadvantages of Alt 4. I looked into the CHP question a little bit further as well for the same reason. I was interested in a definition here that allows us to capture that flexibility for those CHP applications to be incentivized for Aptum to pursue. And my understanding is that even though Alt 1, or with Alts 1, 2, and 3, we're really only putting a definition around beneficial electrification, which CHP is not. CHP is fuel switching. Having a source energy savings metric around beneficial electrification opens the door for Aptum to have that source framework in place, and opens the door for Aptum to be able to explore the application of that to fuel switching as well. And so it inches the program a step further or closer to being able to look at some of those CHP questions, which I appreciated as well for the same reasons.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but that was really
No.
useful.
Yeah, no, I was thinking the exact same thing, and that was a good consideration to raise. Thanks to you both. And then next we have the questions on additional beneficial electrification issues. And this is really directing staff, Aptum, the evaluation work group to continue to research certain areas during the next 2 years. I was at Alts 1, 2, and 3, along with our commenters. And I'll turn it over to Chair Strand.
I was at alternative 1, but we can add 2 and 3. I mean, public participation is great, and clearly we had a lot of it here, and I think we have parties that are interested in providing feedback and ideas, so we might as well hear it, especially at this part in the process, to help make Quad 5 as holistic as possible. Thank
That
you.
sounds great. Thank you.
And I was at 1 and 3, but I'm also fine adding 2. I think additional information, especially because our next decision point is related to those goals and how we set them. So public input on that would be useful.
That sounds great. Thanks to you both. So many options, and I feel like many of them get to the same outcome, more or less. It's how you package them. So the interconnected issue here is the fuel neutral savings goal. For this one, I was at Alt 2, moving toward a fuel neutral savings goal. So continuing to measure our overall MMBTU goal, but removing those fuel-specific KWH and therm savings targets. However, requiring APTM in the program to continue to track the therm and KWH savings, and so that we can monitor those and have those reported in on. I will say the option to reduce the targets to that 70% level while maintaining our current structure was essentially a close second for me. Chair Strand?
So I was at your close second position, but I can join you at 2 for this one as well.
Yeah, I was considering the lower percentage for and those would be my preference, I think. So that'd be Alt 1 sub C, I believe, is what you were speaking to. And that is strictly because I don't fully understand how big of a shift this would be, or what are the unintended consequences potentially of moving to a fully fuel neutral. And so would appreciate any of your thoughts on that. If moving towards this completely goal setting based on MMBTU, does that, I guess my main concern was, we're in this period of electric load growth, and are we signaling, like, taking our foot off the pedal on pursuing savings on the electric side by doing this? And that's my fear of some unintended consequences. So happy to hear any thoughts that anybody has on that.
Yeah, that's helpful, and that is one of the reasons I had been looking at Alt 1 sub C as a close second. I think it is a slightly more interim step toward a similar outcome. I think with the overall fuel neutral goal and then just tracking KWH and therm, it gives us an opportunity to continue and monitor and track those questions that you have, and to do something if directionally things are heading in a way that we wouldn't intend. It gives us that monitoring and reporting, but it does remove the potential bonus and penalty for those KWH and therm targets. And I think what we would have to do under the fuel neutral goal is, and we'd have to do this under any option, but we would have to, after this decision, go back and renegotiate the contract with APTM. So it's a contract amendment around the bonus and the penalty, no matter what. So I think some of that is still in the details. That said, I can join you both on Alt 1 sub C as a little bit more of an interim step toward what we're talking about here.
I think that's fair, and it doesn't preclude us from getting into alternative 2 eventually, right?
Exactly.
Yep, okay.
Exactly.
That makes sense, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks to you both. And are we ready for a motion? I think so too. Okay. Great. All right, for agenda item 12 in docket 5FE 104, I move that the commission staff draft an order consistent with our discussion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, that brings us to agenda item 13, docket 5780 TE 111, which is the application of Sturgeon Bay Utilities to modify its parallel generation tariff schedules. I will note upfront that Commissioner Nieto is recused from participating in this docket, so this will just be between Commissioner Hawkins and I. So first, I do want to start by acknowledging that the parallel generation and buyback rates in general are complex and technical subjects. And so I really do appreciate all the work put forth by our commission staff, the applicant, and Renew, who intervened in this proceeding. I'm just going to give some very brief background because there's a lot of information here. But Sturgeon Bay is a municipally owned electric utility that serves approximately 9,800 customers. The utility is a member and wholesale customer of WPPI Energy. Sturgeon Bay does not own any generation facilities. Instead, it purchases power and power delivery services from WPPI. Although technically not a party to the proceeding, WPPI did submit this application on behalf of Sturgeon Bay, and WPPI's staff provided testimony in support of the application. Currently, Sturgeon Bay has a PGS-1 net metering tariff that sets a buyback rate for net generation at the retail rate, and a PGS-2 tariff that sets the buyback rate at the wholesale supplier rate. In this docket, Sturgeon Bay proposes to modify these buyback rates and seeks to have them instead reflect WPPI's avoided cost to be determined by MISO energy market prices. As of October 2023, Sturgeon Bay had approximately 40 customers taking service under the parallel generation tariffs. I am not a big fan of burying the lead, so I'm going to get to my major points here. I was fully prepared to deny this application today for several reasons, including that I'm not sure why it's before us at this time. One of the most striking aspects of this record is the apparent confusion about what is actually happening to the excess generation produced by Sturgeon Bay's customer-owned facilities, how that excess generation is being accounted for and purchased by WPPI. During the hearing in the 11th hour of the development of this record, an applicant witness explained that WPPI does not, in fact, purchase this excess output because it would be administratively inefficient to do so. This revelation contradicts other evidence in the record suggesting that WPPI was accounting for and purchasing the excess output. I understand that WPPI and Sturgeon Bay would argue that it doesn't matter if the output is purchased by WPPI because Sturgeon Bay is an all requirements customer of WPPI. They contend that the avoided cost rate should be based on WPPI's avoided cost. Even if this was indisputably true, the record does not address the actual accounting of how the excess generation is passed through WPPI and how WPPI avoids having to purchase energy through the MISO market as a result of that pass-through. Instead, the record demonstrates that the proposed avoided cost method is based on theoretical concepts and not actual practices. If the excess generation from customer-owned resources is so low that it's inefficient to account for, then why are these tariff changes even necessary? So again, I'm a bit unsure of why it's before us at this time because in legal terms, I feel that it's not ripe. To me, this application seems to be a solution in search of a problem that doesn't really exist. Elements of the application are based on a concept that exists in theory instead of a practice that's currently exercised in reality. I also found the record insufficient for rendering a fully informed decision. Even if I were to completely ignore the lack of need for this tariff change due to the very few parallel generation customers of Sturgeon Bay, and the fact that WPPI does not purchase the excess generation from the customer-owned resources, I'm still left with the unresolved issue of how to determine the appropriate methodology for calculating the applicant's actual avoided cost. In short, I have a lot of unanswered questions, and walking through the decision matrix now is not going to get them answered. But I would like to salvage the work that's been done thus far. So I am going to propose that we reopen the record for additional analysis and take more time to fill in the gaps. At this point, I think this is our best course of action for the viability of this application. And I would suggest that the applicant and WPPI, commission staff, and Renew use this time to work together so a more complete and thorough record can be developed. So specifically, I'll talk through a couple, or at least 4 things that I think should be included with the additional time. So I think the record would benefit from a more complete examination of additional avoided cost methodologies. This could include, but not be limited to, an evaluation of how various components of the base cost of power calculation could be considered as part of an avoided cost methodology for behind-the-meter resources. And as an extension of that, I think there should also be analysis and greater discussion as to why the avoided cost for behind-the-meter excess generation is valued differently for PGS-1 and PGS-2. The record would also benefit from additional analysis of avoided capacity costs, especially as it relates to PGS-1 and for front-of-the-meter generation systems. And while the locational marginal price avoided cost rates are proposed here, The record would benefit from additional analysis of the feasibility of a forecasted LMP versus the 3-year average of MISO day-ahead LMPs proposed by the applicant. In addition, the record would benefit from a discussion of and/or a mechanism describing how LMP rates would be updated, audited, and incorporated into the parallel generation tariffs on an annual basis. So again, under the scenario I'm proposing, we will not work through the decision matrix today, but the commission, we could direct the reopening of the record to gather additional information consistent with our discussion. And then once that's complete, the commission will have the option to take up the request at a future meeting with that more fully developed record. So that's what I'm proposing, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts, Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you, Chair Strand. I do have some thoughts. And a couple items that I was going to suggest today, I was going to ask to see an updated tariff from the applicant. So while still thinking about your proposal to reopen the record, there's certainly some things that I was looking for that would benefit from seeing that in a later filing or a modified tariff. So I can appreciate that. I will say, and I will not hide the ball either, I did think there was sufficient information for me to make a decision on this today, and the various pieces of the proposal I thought were well laid out. In particular, whether WPPI buys back the power in the application, it says there's a various approach and they are able to decide whether or not they do. And so it was apparent from the very beginning of their filing that they could or couldn't buy it back, and that wasn't necessarily an all or nothing. They have administrative flexibility. So and just based on the physics, whether they buy it back or not, they'll be buying less power because there'll be electricity offset within their system. So I'm not expecting the applicant to come back with something that clearly shows how it tracks every zillionth kilowatt hour, into infinitesimally small. So that was one thing that I was comfortable with. And your comments on the differences in capacity cost for PGS1 and front of the meter, PGS2, I was struggling with that for a long time, and actually just found the footnote I'd been searching for just yesterday. And so there was justification for that difference, and it's based on the size of the systems, where smaller systems are offsetting customer load, and so they're getting that capacity value and that full retail price that they're offsetting. And larger systems are less likely to be correlated with customer load, and so you're able to get that capacity benefit from selling back more regularly. And so I thought that was sufficient justification for why that was different, and seemed to make sense to me. If we do reopen and are asking for additional information, I want it to be known that I am fully supportive of the average LMP, the historical use. I think that makes a ton of sense and was well supported. And so I think that's a great avoided cost of energy approximation. I did have one suggested change, which would be to instead rely on seasonal values instead of on-peak and off-peak, but go to a more granular approach. Staff recommended that, and the applicant indicated in their rebuttal that they were open to that. It was just more administratively complex. And so I think that that's something that I would like to see in a follow-up filing, would be what those seasonal LMPs look like. And then that leads to my biggest concern, which was related to the capacity payments for both behind the meter and front of the meter. Behind the meter, which relies on the MISO PRA capacity prices, while acknowledging that capacity prices in MISO are now set on a seasonal basis, the tariff doesn't indicate how those seasonal values will get used to set the capacity price. So there needs to be clarification there on what will be done with those seasonal capacity values. So that was a concern that I need to see some explanation in the tariff language, how those values will get used. For the front of the meter capacity values, I had a concern that the applicant seemed to piece together different aspects of previously approved tariffs to the detriment of the capacity price, and it didn't make any sense to me. There was a use of the 50% cone and then 50% for accreditation, and it just kind of whittled away. But no other approved tariffs do that in that manner. And so I'll just be clear, in favor of the 100% cone while using the accredited capacity as we've approved for other IOUs. So again, something I think needs to be better explained, because the record didn't seem to support their proposal for that front of the meter capacity value. So listing all these things in the hopes that I get additional information on some of those big concerns. And I maybe have missed one. I got to double check that I haven't skipped over any of my other. Okay. Yes,
Okay.
all I got.
I read everything you did, and like you just said, there's a number of things that would help augment this record. And I think that it's more appropriate for that to happen prior to decision being issued rather than after the fact. So I'm going to stay in my desire to reopen the record and allow that additional information to be added, conducted, discovered, et cetera, for us to make a decision at a future meeting.
Sounds good. I can join you there.
Okay, so that means that we're just gonna need a motion to reopen, but.
Yeah, and just for process clarification, what I would envision happening is commission staff would work to draft an order reopening the record that tries to capture your discussion here today. I know everyone's been fiercely taking notes and would watch the playback, so we'll do the same, and if need be, consult with each of you independently to make sure our order to reopen captures what you would like to see. Certainly, there may be other things that the parties want to clarify or add to, and that's not to the detriment of this, but make sure that those key components are drafted or identified in that order reopening the evidentiary record. And then from a procedural standpoint, I assume you'd want it then kick back to the ALJ. The ALJ then will determine the timing and process, whether it's supplemental testimony, new testimony, and the deadlines for that.
Yep, that's exactly what I was envisioning. Thank you.
So yes, so just a motion to reopen the evidentiary record and the matter to be returned to the commission following additional proceedings.
I move that we reopen the record in docket number 5780 TE 111 and ask that staff draft whatever Cindy was just saying.
The order to reopen reflecting our conversation today.
The order to reopen reflecting our conversation today.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Those abstaining? Aye. Thank you. So that does conclude our official business for today. Our next open meeting is scheduled for next Thursday, October 17th, 2024 at 10:30 a.m. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I move we stand adjourned until Thursday, October 17, 2024 at 10:30 a.m.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.